All right, we're back talking scouting on the Ourlads Football Channel, YouTube channel, and of course the Ourlads Football Network. Thanks for joining us as we are still talking Big Ten football. We're going to be talking defense on today's show. Last week we went a little overboard on the time, so we've changed the format a little bit. And I think this is important to note because you might be going after this show, well, why did you only talk about those guys? It's this guy and that guy and this guy. Well, we just can't talk about everybody. So we're going to limit it to just one of each from our top two scouts here, Hayden and Dave. And then I'll throw in like a best of the rest group. And then we'll move on. And again, don't forget when we get to the end of what I would say July, early August, college football is going to be hot and heavy here on the channel, including the NFL. And we're going to be previewing all the conferences, previewing all the teams. And so we're going to get, really deep into the talent level of college football. So trust me, if your name wasn't really mentioned or we didn't have a big breakdown, we will be doing that soon enough. All right. So Dave Syvertsen, Hayden Russell joining us. How's it going, guys?
Good, Greg. How are you, man?
Doing good. And don't forget, everybody, this is coming out really soon. You can order it now on ourlads.com, the draft review guide. This is last year's. So still don't know who's on the cover yet for 2024, but check it out. You also want to check out the 2024 draft guide. So this is also obviously really cool because you could check out not only the players that were drafted, but there's a lot of players in here that were not drafted, that were college free agents that have scouting reports for your favorite team. So check that out. And of course, make sure to subscribe here on our YouTube channel, like and share all that really good stuff. If you enjoy watching our videos and you enjoy scouting and you just enjoy college and football and the NFL. So let's get right to it. Defense, Big Ten. We'll start with the edge group. And Dave, we're going to start with one of several Ohio State Buckeyes that we're going to be discussing today. And also, I don't know if you noticed, but maybe you did. We have another player that is actually making a transition from linebacker to edge that was on your group. So you get to talk about two guys that are going to be pretty big time prospects playing in the Big Ten this year.
Yeah, JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State, 6'4", 271. Real cool backstory on him. This was actually the best defensive recruit get this program has had since 2000. And I was actually surprised when I read that. I don't really keep myself up to speed on high school recruiting until I come across this information for the scouting process for the NFL. And the reason I was surprised is this is not a kid like James Pierce when we talked about the SEC pass rushers where his tools are just off the charts. Height, weight, length, speed, explosion, those traditional traits that you associate with a defensive end. He doesn't have that. He's not, by no means is he a slouch physically. But I just expected to see someone with this kind of pedigree as a high school recruit to have a different tool set. This was actually a guy that when I scouted him at this time last year, assuming he might come out in the 2024 draft, he was a guy that I thought it was going to be underrated because I thought that he didn't have the top tier explosion and juice off the edge. Similar to a Braylon Trice, I'm trying to find some names that we have recently talked about. Braylon Trice, a guy that really productive as any pass rusher in the country over the past couple of years. But, we're going to talk about this a lot in the scouting process. Just because you're a dominant college football player does not mean you project to the NFL at a high level. And that's kind of like the tier that I had him in at this point last summer. The 2023 season, he did not produce as much as I wanted him to. I do think that was a key reason why he went back. He just didn't have that Bosa or Chase Young caliber season where you said, hey, this guy's a definite first rounder. I personally still think he's in a first round discussion. But, and part of it I want to kind of get into is what he does against his top competition. I mean, this is a kid that there's a lot of tape on him against Broderick Jones, first round pick from the Steelers 2 years ago from Georgia. He's got tape against Joe Alt from last season. He's got tape against Olu Fashanu. first-round tackles. And of those guys, Joe Alt was the only one that really, I would say, beat him from a game perspective. He ate Fashanu's lunch multiple times with just sheer power. He beat Broderick Jones with second effort and rush moves. And those tapes are the ones I value the most. If I could pick any tape to watch on someone at this point, it's going to be against who their best competition was. And, I'm still a little kind of confused on what he might be at the next level. Is he Terrell Suggs or is he Kwity Paye? Both first-round caliber dudes, first good players, but you're talking about, is he great or is he good? And that's what we don't know about him yet. But there's a lot to like about his game that translates to the next level.
Well, the size is the deal, isn't it? Because
6'4", 271,
yeah,
and plays heavy. Like, he is a heavy-handed, physical bull rusher. When he really strikes you with both of his hands with the bend, he's got great bend. Those are pro caliber traits right away.
And again, if you're a big time college football fan, you should remember the Ohio State Penn State game, which he had one of the games of the season in college football for a defender, and so it was surprising that he did not take the next step last year. And if he goes back to being a consistent player, like the player we saw in that Penn State game, not only is he a first-round draft pick, but he might be a top 10 draft pick.
Yeah. I mean, his highs are very high, and he's one of the most experienced players in the class. I mean, he's going to come into the NFL with over 2,000 snaps on his resume. And, not going to say that sways him a lot, but you can tell the way he plays, he knows the game. Mentally, I think he's one of the smartest, quickest reaction, instinctive defenders, run and pass. He's not a specialist. He's an every down threat that can really set an edge against the run and get to the passer in multiple different ways. So that's where I stand with him. I think that he's probably not going to end up as a top 10, top 15 pick, but a Kwity Paye, 19 overall, year one starter, can see the field in any kind of situation and simply help your defense play better. That's what I think he's going to be.
Okay, now I want to bring Hayden in here to talk about, because I like Hayden's player prospects, because he's always going to find those little diamonds that are not the obvious choices. So Hayden, you like this kid from Minnesota, Ja Joyner?
Yeah, Ja Joyner is going to be someone that pretty much no one has heard about before. The only reason for that being that he only started one game this past season. He was still honorable mention Big Ten, but a guy that would rotate into the defensive line group regularly. Still ended up with 7.5 sacks this past season. And I think if he were to be put into a starter role, maybe you could see that protection jump up a little bit. He's going to be a fifth-year senior. I believe he still has 2 more years of eligibility because of the COVID rules. So technically couldn't or doesn't have to come out this next year, but could be a possibility. He's listed at 6'5", 265 pounds, and his length definitely shows up on tape. He's got that explosive first step that you're looking for from a great edge rusher prospect. He's got really long arms that help him connect with offensive tackles first. Excellent motor in pursuit. Really an impressive athlete. He's got sufficient bend. He's got a lot of things that you're looking for in someone, a pass rusher looking to transition to the next level. He's a little bit raw with his pass rush moves. He doesn't have a whole lot of polished pass rush moves, in his arsenal. I would even called it, I used the word uncommitted when he was pass rushing. It felt like he was trying to, utilize one of his moves, but wouldn't fully commit into it, was really starting to think about that counter move, what he could do, once that initial move doesn't work. So I still think he's really raw. I still need to see some more hand violence with him on contact. Like I said, he's got those long arms to connect early, but he doesn't utilize them enough. I feel like he's got to use that length to his advantage. So like I said, he's raw. He's going to need to polish some pass rush moves, But I do think he has the traits and the athleticism to be a dominant edge defender in college football next season.
All right. Well, we'll definitely keep an eye on, and that should be really good. I tell you what, watching those two in camp, because you had the offensive tackle dude on our last show, right? Who had the offensive tackle from Minnesota? Yeah, who had the offensive tackle from Minnesota?
That was me. That was me,
you, Dave. Oh, okay. Yep. So that should be a really good camp film, watching those two guys go at it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Abdul Carter. Now, originally a linebacker, And again, you could still consider him a linebacker because he hasn't made the transformation yet to edge rusher, but that is what we're hearing in camp. So I figured maybe this is the best time to talk about him, Dave.
Yeah.
Because there are obvious reasons just listening to why they're making the switch. He's just too good of an athlete, too good of a player. He could be too dominant as an edge rusher instead of just having to play off ball linebacker.
Yeah, when we started putting our list of names together, position by position, as I'm writing Abdul Carter in there, because I really want to talk about him and Tumolo. I acknowledge to myself that I'm cheating here because he is purely an edge defender right now. He's adding weight. He's 262 right now,
oh, wow.
Which tells me he's probably playing the season at around 265. If I'm assuming he'll be in next year's draft class, he might be 265, 270, and because of that, because of the athletic trait.
Oh, you still there, Dave? We can't hear you now, Dave.
Okay, maybe move on to Hayden.
All right,
good, sweet. But yeah, I mean, because of everything that he can do athletically, and because the last time we saw a defender like this wear number 11 at Penn State and what happened to him in the NFL, I mean, I'll tell you what. It's hard for me to not think of Micah Parsons when I'm watching his tape. And I haven't watched a lot, but the way he can explode off the ball, the way he can play sideline to sideline, the versatility, the athletic profile, even with how physical he makes contact with the target. I think that Dallas hesitation to put Micah Parsons as a full-time edge and the fact that Penn State did not put him there is going to kind of just, hey, you're going to end up as a pass rusher at some point. Why delay the inevitable? The fact that he can play multiple spots does matter a lot to me, though. In 2022 is his freshman year. It was probably the best freshman season we've ever seen out of a Penn State linebacker. And if you think about some of the freshman linebacker and people that come through those halls at that position, I mean, some people still consider this like the linebacker U is Penn State. And he started off red hot, 13 games, 6 starts, 10 and a half tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 4 pass breakups. The guy's a football player. He's a freak athlete, and he's now entering a position where they're becoming some of the most valuable assets in the NFL. So I think Abdul Carter probably has more top 10 potential than any defender in this class for the 2025 NFL draft if he comes out and really breaks out as a full-time pass rusher.
All right. Now, my best of the rest mentions, speaking of Ohio State, Jack Sawyer, who is a former top recruit. Speaking of top recruits, this was another one for Ohio State. So they got both these guys on the defensive line this season, Ohio State, Jack Sawyer. Also, Josiah Stewart. I want to keep an eye on Josiah Stewart because he was a huge deal at Coastal Carolina. Only played kind of part-time last year for Michigan. So he's going to be a full-time guy now. And he didn't prove his run defense last year, which now I think he could be more of a complete guy for Michigan this season. So keep an eye on Josiah Stewart for Michigan. And I'm not gonna talk about many Rutgers players. So when I get a chance, I'm going to talk about Aaron Lewis because he's definitely one of their better prospects. Did not have the season we expected last season. His run defense wasn't as good. And who knows? Maybe that's going to be his calling card at the next level is, strictly as a pass rusher. But he's going to be a big-time player, I think, for Rutgers this year, and I expect him to have an even better season. So those are 3 other players that I think everybody should be keeping an eye on. And before I move on to defensive tackle, were there any other players that you just wanted to just mention?
I could talk a little bit about Jack Sawyer. Just in terms of what Ohio State has on the defensive line this year is going to be really tough to block. You look at Dave was just talking about Tui Malau. You look at Jack Sawyer, 2 edge rushers that are going to be 6'4", 6'5" range, really tall, really long, somewhere going to be around 270 pounds. I mean, that's really tough to stop on both edges. You're going to have quarterbacks scrambling for their lives. You have 2 massive interior defensive linemen, one of which I'm going to be talking about. Really interested to see what they do after losing Mike Hall from this last year, who I thought, in my opinion, was, if not the best interior pass rusher in this past year's draft, definitely one of them for sure. Having to replace that on the inside and finding interior pass rush, potentially moving one of those guys inside on third downs, third and longs, just to try and get some more pass rushers on the field. But even just those 2 on the field out on the edges is going to be difficult to block.
Anything, Dave, or we're good to go?
Yeah, we're good to go there. I mean,
Okay.
I don't have much on the other guys. I mean, I've seen Sawyer. He was a guy that we were talking about last year as well. I didn't see first round in him. I saw a day 2 starting caliber DN, but lacks lacks that special trait, but that's okay. That's still doable in the NFL. If you do,
Sure.
some of these jack of all trades, master of none guys are the ones that sustain their careers the longest at the next level because they're not so dependent on a single trait or two. So, but he's definitely a pro. I give Hayden, he's got the pronunciation of the names down pat before I do. So I got to catch up to him. To him. I hate guys that I don't have their names down yet. And
So what's his name, Hayden?
Tui Malau. I had to say it for a
Malau.
previous
That's
video.
yeah.
All right,
Boy,
awesome.
nice work there, Hayden.
Let's now talk defensive tackles, and we're going to talk about a former Pac-12 team making their way to the Big Ten for the first time. And this is a player that you have mentioned a few times as a teaser. Player that I'm beginning to think at defensive tackle is going to be one of your favorite players in the draft, Bear Alexander, Dave.
Yeah, very easy name to say, by the way.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah, Bear Alexander. I do think it's. I've done a lot of reading and research on what his story truly is, and it's one of the kind of like I would dare to even say one of the more emotional stories you're going to read about a kid and his upbringing, where he's at right now, and it can explain a lot of the things where you're saying, like, all right, is this kid at his upside? Why isn't he doing more? Because of he went to 5 different high schools in 4 years. Father was in prison from an early age. And he bounced around from high school to high school, partially because he was getting into trouble, but partially because the state of Texas kept toying with his eligibility, saying that he was going to schools to only play football, and he was commuting an hour and a half each way with someone that he was living with, that he ended up calling Pop, who was someone that kind of took him under his wing, and he ended up being on a school staff. It was a really weird situation. And as often is the case with these kind of high school politics, it's the kids that suffer. And he was a situation where he was obviously a talented football player and wasn't getting into a lot of legal trouble. It's just kind of like your typical teenage mischievous type stuff, maturity type issues. And he deserved to be on the football field. And I think he only played about 1.5 years or 2 years of total high school football because of these eligibility issues. He ended up at IMG Academy. Where that's for those that don't know the high school scene, that is the kind of boarding type high school program for sports in the country, where some of the best football players in the NFL come from that program, and it's loaded with 4- and 5-star recruits. He goes there, he gets linked up with Georgia, and plays there for a year. He turned it on towards the end of the season. National championship defense, has a sack against TCU in the college football playoffs and championship game and SEC championship. He was on fire those last 3 weeks. Offseason comes, and he wasn't being treated the way he was told he was going to be treated in regards to his starting spot and starting status on that Georgia defense. So he leaves the program and he goes to USC, following Lincoln Riley, who was a big part of Bear Alexander's high school recruiting. He almost committed to him at Oklahoma. And once he went to USC, kind of followed him out there. And what he did last year from the A-gap, nobody was even close. This is Dexter Lawrence type production from the A-gap. And that's a spot, nose tackle, that you just don't see a lot of pass rush production from. The amount of double teams that you get usually is reserved for bigger bodies that are meant to hold the point of attack. But I did a little study on where interior pass rushers got their pressure from: B gap, A gap, over tackle, and he was in a league of his own with what he did from the nose tackle spot as a pass rusher. And the recent name that came to mind while watching him, just from his physical profile perspective, little tall, plays with high hips, but he's long, he's athletic, he's really tough to get off his point of attack, is Fedarian Mathis from Alabama a couple of years ago. Ended up being a second rounder, tore his ACL prior to his rookie season, so we didn't really get to see him much, and I think he's still trying to work his way back. But if you're trying to picture who this kid is on tape, it's that's where I think his starting point is right now. If he comes out and has a productive 2024, he could be in the run for maybe one of the top 3 defensive tackles taken in the draft next year.
All right. Now we'll move on over to Ohio State again. Hayden wants to talk about Tyleik Williams, and Tyleik Williams. Do you because I've noticed that he's gained an awful lot of weight since last season, so that should be good. but is he more of a one-dimensional player at this point? And that's okay as long as you're dominant in that specific aspect of your game. But is that what we're looking at with this player?
So that's an interesting question just from the way that they utilized him last year. I noticed this when I was watching Michael Hall this past season. The way that they utilized both of their interior defensive linemen was really interesting to me because Michael Hall was someone that we were expecting to play in that, 280, 290, somewhere in that range, where Tyleik Williams is like a nose tackle. Like he's a bigger nose tackle. He's listed at 327 pounds on the website. Someone you would expect to maybe fit more of that nose tackle, plugging gaps, taking on multiple linemen. And they actually flip-flop their roles pretty regularly. Had Mike Hall kind of in that 2-eye position where he's taking on multiple blocks. Now, his explosiveness off the line definitely helped him in that, but taking on multiple blocks at 280 pounds, 290 pounds, whereas Tyleik Williams, who we said you'll hear me talk about later, his pass rushing is not really his specialty. At 330 pounds at 3-tech, where he's going to have a lot of one-on-one situations, it didn't really help them a whole lot compared to what they could have gotten out of Mike Hall out there. So I thought it was really interesting, but that was the one thing I took away from watching their tape. I believe it is pronounced Tyleik Williams. You might be right. I'm not 100%.
Oh, no, yeah. I say you're probably right, but who knows? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know either. This is one of the ones I'm not sure on either, but he was third team All Big Ten this past season. He should be taking over at Ohio State's premier interior defensive lineman this year. Like I had talked about, he's 6'3", 327 pounds, according to the website. Now, watching his tape, one of the things that stood out to me was his ability to convert from speed to power. I know that's one of Coach Coop's favorite things to look at from an edge rusher, but you also saw it from him as well in terms of being able to bull rush and pass rush situations, really drive offensive linemen into the backfield, collapse the pocket was one of his specialties in terms of pass rushing. He's so strong at the line of scrimmage. And then when he doesn't defeat blocks, he's still able to get his hands up and break up a lot of passes at the line of scrimmage. Against solo blocks, able to hold his own in the run game. He's able to meet running backs in the holes. He's got pretty impressive lateral agility against zone schemes for someone of his size. Like I said, he's got strong hands to shed. Would really like to see him sink his pads a little bit better against double teams. There were a couple instances where he was taking on double teams and got really driven off the line pretty easily with his high pad levels. So would like to see him drop the pads a little bit. Not an overly athletic prospect like we talked about, would probably fit in better maybe as a nose tackle in that 2-eye role, where, as I said, maybe sink his pads, maybe take on more double teams than out at 3-tech where he played a lot of last season. And then other than his bull rush and collapsing the pocket, he doesn't add a whole lot as a pass rusher, but a lot of his strengths I think are going to really help him transition to the NFL. Might not be like a early first round guy, maybe even like early second round, early third round type of guy just because of his skill set. But I do think he's going to be a talented player and he's really going to help out an NFL defense at the next level.
All right, let's get the Michigan fans excited because I am one of them, and so I'm gonna back them with the best of the rest mentions here because I got 2 of them from Michigan: Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Now, Graham is definitely at the top of the list, and I know that if you take a look at it, I think even if you compare him to Jenkins, who was a second-round draft pick, I think he's even more special than Jenkins. And I think that this year he's a complete guy. I think he has what it takes to be a top 10 draft pick. I really do. I think he could be a force, and I think he could show that this year. And I even think Kenneth Grant, his partner, is going to be an excellent player to form maybe the best defensive tackle tandem in the entire country. So, I don't know what you guys think about Graham, but I have big aspirations. I've seen him a lot. Being a fan, and I haven't seen anybody that good that early in his career. He was dominating as a true freshman, as I have seen with Mason Graham.
Yeah, the body control, balance, quickness, agility at 320 pounds. I mean, it's so hard not to notice, whether he's a freshman or sophomore this upcoming year, his junior season. So the movement traits are there. The bend, he plays with excellent knee bend and low hips and high hands. Like you rarely see him get caught out of position from a leverage perspective. And there's not much to say. I do want to see, he's one of these guys. I think that the measurements might come into play a little bit with the arm length. Like I know it gets talked about a lot, and some people don't want to accept it, is a big deal. And I
Yeah.
can't tell you what his numbers are. I'm just looking based on
Sure.
what I guess, based on where his hands are hanging below his hips, that you could see a Braden Fisk type. Maybe he gets into round 2 because of that reason. But this kid is 25 pounds heavier and has a little bit more offer, and he's younger too. It's only his 3rd year. So maybe somewhere between top 10 and where Braden Fisk went, kind of like in the teens or 20s is where I'd project him right now. He wasn't as productive as you would think on a per snap basis. He did have a lot of, dare I say, highlight reel caliber pass rushes where he's like, oh, this kid can do it. But if you watch him snap to snap, I did see, considering it's only his 2nd year in college, I did see him just kind of disappear for stretches at times. So that's one thing I want to see. There's a little bit more consistency there. Kenneth Grant is kind of like, he is what he is. I don't see his status changing right now. He's going to be a starting nose tackle at the next level. Early in his career, he's going to be dependable. You know what you're getting, what you're not getting out of him as well, which is just as important in some cases. A guy that's going to be an excellent run defender that if you leave him on an island alone with a lone blocker, he's going to shrink the pocket. So, yeah, I agree with you, Greg. I don't think there's a better D-tackle combo in college football than these two.
You want to add anything, Hayden, or was there another defensive tackle that was on your list that just didn't make it?
I thought it was impressive just how deep Michigan was at defensive tackle even this past season. We talked about his name is slipping my mind, the D tackle they just had drafted this past year. Plus you add on, Grant and Mason Graham as well. I mean, that's a heck of a group right there for sure.
Yeah.
And
multiple DNs too.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
So you think that that's the only thing that is holding back? Is the big difference between Grant being potentially a top 10 pick as opposed to being an early 2nd round pick might be his measurements
and consistency. Is what I'd like to see a little bit more out of his game.
Okay. All right. Let's move on now to linebackers. And since Dave already used it as linebacker,
cheated.
Hayden's going to start with Jay Higgins. And this is the first Iowa player that we're going to talk about. And believe me, there are many more, especially in the defensive backfield. I mean, they're loaded in the defensive backfield. It's scary. But you want to know why Iowa's defense is so good? This is a big reason, Hayden.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. If you're not familiar with Iowa's defense, maybe it's a team that you don't follow really closely. I mean, they have one of the best defenses in college football year in and year out. Jay Higgins became the focal point of that defense this past season. He's really been more of a reserve player for most of his career, backed up Jack Campbell before he was drafted by the Lions, and really broke out in his starter role this past season. He had a staggering 171 tackles this past season, which is a heck of a lot, which he was multiple publications gave him first team All-American honors, tied a school record for tackles. I mean, if you're looking at a 1 year wonder, I'm not saying he's a 1 year wonder or anything like that, but you're looking at a single season where this is his first season starting. I mean, that's eye-popping numbers. But as football fans are aware, tackles don't always tell the full story. So wanted to dig into the tape a little bit and really see, what's going on here. Because, I mean, you look at some of the stat lines he had. I think he had 14 tackles against Michigan, 16 against Tennessee, 18 against, I believe it was Wisconsin. So it's not like he's just racking up 25 tackles against, a FCS program or, a group of 5. I mean, these are top, Power 5 programs. So that he's, making extensive plays against. So really wanted to take a look at the full picture and see everything. Thought he was really impressive in terms of reading and reacting to what's in front of him, especially for, like I said, a first-year starter. Sometimes we use the coaching term, I coach defensive ball, we use the term Mike Singletary eyes, trying to see the entire field because Mike Singletary was so good. He just saw everything that was going on the field, and he's kind of got that similar type of profile, maybe not to Mike Singletary's extent. But he sees everything, fights his way into gaps versus zone and gap scheme, takes away windows in the passing game. He's got a good understanding of his zone responsibilities. He's a solid athlete. He's going to make plays with great effort. And as you can imagine, with 171 tackles, he's also a pretty sound tackler, both in space and in the box. Couple of things that I'm a little bit worried about when transitioning him to the next level is his foot speed is not really ideal. It's going to hinder him from being a perimeter or a sideline to sideline defender. Needs to increase his assertiveness, and his physicality on contact. He oftentimes would let offensive linemen climb to him and latch onto him without much of a fight. And that's kind of that's a way to lose the rep. So definitely want to see him try and avoid offensive linemen at the second level. And then especially, in terms of being a little bit more physical on contact, using his hands, seeing a little bit more pop when he's making contact. So still think he's going to be a work in progress. But for someone who, like I said multiple times now, has only 1 year of starting experience, a lot of special teams experience, really paid his dues along the way, I'm really interested to see how he performs this next season and if he can replicate his production.
How does he compare to Campbell?
I don't want to compare him to Jack Campbell. Like, I thought Jack Campbell was a first-round talent when I watched him coming out the past season. I don't think Jay Higgins is going to be quite as talented as him. I think he's going to be potentially more of a day 3 prospect. But if we start to see some of those deficiencies go away, like I said, with his speed, I think he could bump up potentially to day 2 as well.
So do you then, it sounds like to me you're comparing him more to like a J.D. Bertrand type of prospect.
That would be a good comparison for him, yes. I think he's a little bit smaller maybe than J.D. I'd have to get the measurements on him. I don't know him off the top of my head, but he's a little bit undersized for the position. So has that going for him as well.
And a couple other linebackers I wanted to throw into the mention list. Jeffrey Bassa from Oregon, who had a big breakout last year. And Carson Bruner from Washington, who's now playing in the Big Ten this season. And both of them are actually more cover linebackers, especially Bruner. Bruner's really, really elite in the cover linebacker category. So a couple of players I noticed that are going to be coming into the Big Ten from the Pac-12 that we'll want to keep an eye on. So any other prospects, Dave, anyone else that you wanted to talk about before we move on?
Yeah, I did a little bit of work on Bassa coming into this. I was going to talk about him if I didn't talk about Abdul Carter, or if I get called out for making Abdul Carter not a linebacker. Former defensive back, so like you said, and he actually is fitting this mold of what the league is looking for at linebacker every year now. It's guys that are athletic enough and even have some experience as a safety that can drop and kind of play that athletic linebacker role. He is big enough. He's 6'2", 230. He's got good length. I watched 2 of his games from last year quickly against Utah and USC, and I thought he was one of the best defenders on the field in both games, all over the field, left and right. He cut down on his missed tackles a lot. I think he cut them in half from 2023 to 2022. And keep in mind, he entered Oregon as a defensive back. I can't say that I went back and watched his previous tape, but just looking at the production and the numbers and the game grades, it looks like he took his game to another level in 2023. And this is what you want to see. We talked about this last time as well. You want to not only see the tools and the traits, you want to see guys get better throughout their career. And that's what we're seeing with him. And if he can get over even another hump here in 2024, he has that kind of new age starting linebacker feel to his game initially. And we'll just now, I think it's going to be a little bit tougher for him. He's going to have to defend the run at a higher level here in the Big Ten. And I think that's the question I have with him. Doesn't have a lot of feel in coverage. He's the athletic traits. And the other side is, can he defend the inside run? And I think we're going to see plenty of that in 2024. Okay.
Let's talk corners. And we're going to start off with who might end up being the top defender chosen in the 2025 draft. And Hayden and I were trying to we were discussing whether or not could he be the highest. Like how far do we go back to how high he could be selected as at a corner, considering Stingley was the 3rd pick right? Back in a couple of years ago. And then you had Sauce right behind him. So Will Johnson, though, it all depends on the quarterbacks. But since this is going to be a quarterback heavy draft like last year, can Will Johnson, can he reach number 2, number 1 status, Dave?
Ooh, number 1. Yeah, the answer at this point, yeah, I'm not going to put my name next to it in pen, but is it possible? Absolutely. I don't know if there are betting odds. I think some of our other Ourlads staff can take care of that for us, but are there betting odds on him being a number 1 overall pick? And no matter what, you're always going to have a defender / a corner really far down the odds list, but it might be a smart bet at this point, because if there is someone that's going to surprise you in a quarterback draft that might not have a top flight guy, the edge rusher group we think there's going to be a couple studs there, but they have to produce. This position is really hard to fill in the NFL. And you can look at some of this when you find a good corner, just look at the contracts. They're approaching wide receiver quarterback type money. And Will Johnson, in my opinion, is a better player than Patrick Surtain was coming out of Alabama a couple years ago. He was a top 10 pick, similar physical profile. And I think this kid has been better than that for a year already. I mean, what he did as a freshman, coming in with that 5-star status, his father played at Michigan. He hit the ground running. There wasn't a whole lot of transition with him. As a true freshman, you saw it. And it's that combination of size, foot speed, feel, ball skills. 3 interceptions in 2022, 4 in 2023, 6 pass breakups in 2022, 8 pass breakups in 2023. And I'm going to circle back to this. You have tape against Marvin Harrison. Go look at it. He did get beat by Marvin, I think, at least once on a back shoulder throw. There was a brilliant catch by Harrison. But if I remember correctly, he got him a few times underneath. And as a press corner, which a lot of corners are not playing press in college right now, he's a guy that is already proving he can do it against the best receivers in college football. In his second year, in his first year as a full-time starter, he's putting that kind of tape out. So, and then I think he's going to test off the charts. These guys from Michigan are coming out more athletic than they ever have. That Harbaugh program, strength and conditioning program, was a big deal. He's measuring right now 6'2", 202. I mean, he's just checking every single box. And he's a guy that I think teams are going to be afraid to throw at. So he might not get that many opportunities here in 2024 in coverage. But you're going to have to kind of use the full. And this is, Coach Coop talks about this all the time. It takes a long time to scout corners because you can just watch hours and hours of tape and just hope that they get thrown at some point. And but in between all those opportunities, you see everything you want to see from him, from a technique perspective, from a recognition perspective, and then from a closing speed recovery perspective. Like offensive linemen, I want to see corners recover because you're not always going to win off the line. And he does that at a high level with that kind of size. So, yeah, right now, Greg, he is in top 5 discussion for sure. And if the quarterbacks don't rise up, he's going to be one of the names that you talk about as number 1 overall pick.
Yeah. And I mean, just following Sauce's career, of course, as a Jet corner and watching him play, I've come to understand even more so how important it is to have a guy like that. Look, I mean, Darrelle Revis was just amazing. And so, again, I understand more than most NFL fans what having an elite cornerback can do to your defense. And nowadays, as you said, it means an awful lot. They're paying these guys and almost as much as they care more, almost, I think, than they do about edge rushers with corners nowadays.
Some do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I lean towards pass rushers, but there's people that I respect very much, both in the league and used to be in the league, scouts, coaches. They value the corner over the pass rusher. They think it's easier to scheme up pressure than it is coverage, especially in today's NFL.
Yeah. So, and like you said, he's been didn't miss a beat. 5-star recruit, came right in, played like an all-pro immediately, and hasn't budged since he's been there. And if he has another stellar season, he could end up. Look, maybe he doesn't get first pick if the quarterback goes, but I think he has a great chance to be the top defender picked in the draft. So,
agreed.
All right, let's now talk about the corner that you wanted to break down on the show here, Hayden. Jabbar Muhammad from Oregon. So this is a former Washington player, not very big, but still a player that made tons of production last year for Washington. They, of course, nearly won a national championship.
Yeah, absolutely. I had heard some good things about Jabbar Muhammad in the past, from back when he was at Oklahoma State to when he was at Washington. So really wanted to take a look at him and came away with, I'm going to call it almost like a love-hate relationship for him. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that when I get into the tape. But just talking a little bit about his background, started off his career at Oklahoma State. He played there for 3 seasons, was a part of that Oklahoma State defense. A lot of people might not remember this. I believe it was 2021 where they had one of the best defenses in the country. Ended up beating Notre Dame. I believe it was the Fiesta Bowl, number 5 in the country or something along those lines.
And that's why he got the gig to Ohio State. The coach.
What's that now?
That's why the defensive coordinator got the job at Ohio State.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yep. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Right. Ended up going to Washington after that this past season, where he was second team All Pac-12, and now he's on his way over to Oregon Like you said, Greg, not the biggest player in the world. He's listed on the website as 5'10", 183. Ended up taking most of his reps on the outside towards the field, but took a few in the slot as well. There's a lot of things to like about him, okay? If you're talking about him from a coverage standpoint, I mean, he's exquisite. I mean, you're talking sticky in man coverage, both in press and in off man. He's got exceptional hip fluidity, acceleration. He's got a really good feel for routes, good eye discipline. He's quick with his back pedal. He's going to make plays on the ball, whether it's closing or with great closing speed. He's going to be able to close break up passes at the catch point. He's going to be able to make interceptions when locked up from deep zone. I mean, he's the full package when you're talking about from a coverage standpoint. With that being said, in terms of tackling and being physical against blockers, he must get better at both of those things. There were points where I was watching his tape where it was, I'm a defensive backs coach, and it bothered me a little bit just watching. It was more of a reluctance to wanting to tackle more than anything. I think he has the ability to tackle. I think it's more of he has to have that drive to want to make tackles, to want to take on blocks. There were points where he would just walk backwards. I always make the analogy in football, someone's always got to be the hammer, someone's got to be the nail, and he's been the nail more often than not than the hammer. So in terms of his coverage ability, he's someone that I really, really love. He could even be one of the best, if not the best coverage corners in all of college football. I mean, some of the plays he made on the football were, eye-popping, like incredible. But if he's going to take the next step to potentially being, you're talking about like an early day one, even just a day one prospect in general, he's got to learn how to tackle. He's got to have that willingness to tackle. He's got to have that willingness to take on blocks before he can take the next step.
And that's something to keep a note for when you're thinking about the draft next year. If he doesn't have, even if he has just mild improvements, you're going to be able to check the box of certain teams, certain coordinators who need to have corners who know how to tackle. So if they don't, especially against the run, and if they don't, they're not even going to be thinking about them. They're going to be telling whoever is running the draft, this guy's crossed off my list. So
absolutely,
how good he covers. Yeah, not on my team.
Right. Absolutely. And when you're scheming up run game stuff on the offensive side of the ball, you're going to be looking for those type of players who don't want to tackle or can't tackle. And more often than not, a lot of those times you're going to be looking at the corners and the safeties as the guys who maybe aren't the best, most physical tacklers. And I know a lot of offensive line coaches, a lot of run game coordinators this year are going to be salivating when they look at Jabbar Muhammad this year, which I hope he's able to, get his tackling down and maybe get a little bit more physical, get aggressive for sure. But I think if he keeps it up the way that he's been playing, he's going to get a lot of balls run at him throughout the season.
All right. And as far as the mentioned, the best of the rest, hey, by the way, we've got another Iowa and Ohio State player. We've got Sebastian Castro from Iowa, who might be the best slot cornerback in the country. Denzel Burke from Ohio State. If it wasn't for Will Johnson, he'd be the one we'd be talking about. And Ricardo Hallman from Wisconsin, who actually was one of the leaders nationally last season in interceptions. So he had a big year in gobbling up quarterback passes last season. So Hallman, Burke, and Castro are other corners, especially, Castro and Burke. Burke would be interesting because he just like Will Johnson. As soon as a top recruit comes into college and doesn't miss a beat. And he was somebody that immediately you knew was going to be a star, especially at Ohio State. And Castro is just another one of those great DBs for Iowa. So what do you guys think before we move on about any of those players or anybody else that you just wanted to mention?
Yeah, Burke's played a ton of football. He's almost at 2,000 snaps already. I feel like he's been there forever. And he was a guy that at this time last year, I think I want to say off the top of my head, I had him as my number 2 corner in the 2024 draft class at this time last year. I don't think he played as well as many thought he would, but sometimes with corners, you have unrealistic expectations, like you just think they're going to be making plays left and right. And he's a guy that just didn't get thrown to as much as he did early in his career. Would like to see him make kind of just finish more, like make a few more plays on the ball. I do want a top flight corner to be someone that's pulling the ball in and not just breaking passes up. Especially if you want to be a number 1 guy. really clean technique, really smooth and easy movement. One thing I look for at this point, before you really get a deep dive on the tape, is do they make things look easy? I mean, I know it sounds pretty simple, but I remember I think it was Dan Shanka telling me something about that early on with Chris Olave, for example. When you watched him run routes at Ohio State, everything just looked easy and natural. And you could apply that to other sports as well. Him playing cornerback looks easy. And in my opinion, outside of quarterback, it's the most difficult position to play in football. And he just makes things look easy. I just want to see a little bit more finish and a little bit more physical play out of him this year. Would kind of bump him back up into that top half of first round status.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a player I was just scouting for the draft review guide, Brian Thomas Jr. Makes it look easy, and it's just such a great athlete, a wide receiver for LSU this past season. All right, now let's wrap up with safety. And we're going to start, Dave, you've got a player who at safety, Hunter Waller from Wisconsin, who packed a punch as far as his tackling ability. He was just the leader back there for Wisconsin's defense. And so who knows? Sky's the limit, I guess, for this upcoming season.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of turnover on the Wisconsin back seven of their defense, and he's like kind of the rock of that unit. So leadership-wise, I think there's going to be a couple different challenges for him this year, and he's no longer going to sneak up on anyone. I want to just make sure it's known this is not a superstar safety prospect. It's just someone that I'm really interested in to watch. His 113 tackles, 73 solo tackles. It was the second most among all defensive backs in the FBS, and I watched his tape against LSU, their bowl game. And he made a couple standout plays against, and that Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors were in that game. He actually popped Malik Neighbors into yesterday on a little wide receiver bubble pass. And his closing speed, his instincts, and his ability to come up and play a linebacker type role in specific looks is going to open up a lot of doors for him. I mean, one thing I still look for in top safety prospects is them to be on the bigger side. Especially now with, I think a lot of these guys have to cover the tight ends. They got to support the run. This is becoming a position, in my opinion, a little bit more and more valuable with each year that passes with all the sub packages that are becoming the base defense. And at 6'2", 215, I think he can handle a lot of different roles. I do think there are some issues with his movement in space and coverage. He is a little slow and late to turn and run vertical against deep routes. So I'm not sure I see him as a single high guy at all. But someone that can kind of mix it up in the box as a linebacker, cover tight ends, and he's going to make his tackle. And he makes plenty of plays on the ball in coverage as well. A guy that I think can wear a lot of hats for your defense.
All right. And then at Ohio State, there's one player that you wanted to talk about, Hayden. And I'll just throw in, because this was one of the best of the rest since he plays alongside Lathan Ransom, is Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs is an incredible freshman. He's not going to be in the 2025 draft, but he's got superstar in him. So keep an eye on Downs, and that is going to be some tandem back there for Ohio State. We just talked about Burke. What a secondary Ohio State's going to have. So why did you want to talk about Ransom?
I really wanted to talk about Ransom just because of the depth that they have in the Ohio State safety room. It's a really young room. Lathan Ransom is returning for his fifth-year senior season, but other than him, we talked about Caleb Downs. He's going to be a true sophomore. I believe they have a redshirt freshman as well, and maybe a true sophomore back there as well. So Lathan Ransom's going to be that guy that's coming in with a ton of experience. He's played in 40 games in total, started 22 of those games. He's going to be that veteran leader in the room, in a room that desperately needs a veteran leader. But like you said, having Caleb Downs playing next to him is going to help him out a lot for sure as well. I think there was a point even last year in the process, I believe it was early on, where we had Lathan Ransom in our top 5 in our stacks. I think it's safety. Yeah. So Dave can confirm that. So he's someone that we've had our eyes on now for a little while, and decided to come back for the 2024 season. Honorable mention Big Ten this past season, despite missing 5 games at the end of the regular season, was healthy enough to come back and play in the Missouri game, but those last 5 games of the regular season wasn't a part of that. He's a solid athlete. He's got quality movement skills. He's got decent lateral agility, solid acceleration. He's good at a few things, but the thing he's really, really good at is his run defense. He's a guy that really wants to come downhill, fly downhill, and make tackles in the run games. He's able to fit out the run. He's physical. He's not afraid to shoot into the backfield and make tackles behind the line of scrimmage. Like we had talked about, when he's getting cracked, he's going to destroy those blockers. That's going to be more of his type of game rather than this rangy, athletic, one high, cover the whole field type of safety. He also adds a lot of special teams value as well. He blocked a couple punts. I believe it was the 2022 season. So he's going to be a guy that you can look at as a potential special teams star as well. Definitely a few things that he needs to work on still. In man coverage, I think his technique is pretty solid. He does leave a little bit too much of a cushion in both zone and man coverage. He's going to have to tighten that cushion just a little bit. And like we talked about, his range as a deep safety is going to be limited. But if you get him in the right scheme where he's going to be a downhill safety, he's going to make most of his plays down in the box. I do think he's going to be someone that could take the next step as a player. Probably not looking at a bona fide day 1, day 2 guy, but if you're on day 3, you need a guy that's going to excel on special teams, excel in the box. He's going to be your type of player.
By the way, just quickly, how surprised were you that Proctor didn't get drafted?
Not very surprised.
Okay.
Just after watching his tape, I think I had a 6th or a 7th round grade on him. He was
just a better college player. He was never going to translate to the pros.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, look, he still has time to develop. I mean, he's still a good prospect, but yeah, that was my point, I guess.
I think it helped too. Dave and I ended up going to the Senior Bowl this year and just comparing him to other players that were down there. It just looked like some other players just had a little bit more juice than he had. Now, that's not saying that I don't think he's someone that can make a roster. I did add that I think he could be a really key special teams player for a team in his first few seasons while he continues to develop. But in terms of getting onto the field on the defensive side of the ball, I think he's still got a little while before we get to that point.
Okay, and then the best of the rest as far as the mentions for safety, and there are a handful I wanted to throw in there. And by the way, Downs is the younger brother of Josh Downs. So his brother's already playing for the Indianapolis Colts. He played with Alabama last year, transferred. I wonder if he would have stayed at Alabama. I think he would have stayed at Alabama if Nick Saban was still coaching, but I guess we'll never know. The other safeties I wanted to throw in, Dylan Thieneman, again, if that's how you pronounce his name, from Purdue. So I think he had about 6 interceptions last year, so a player to watch. Kevin Winston from Penn State, who's very good at both versus the run and in coverage. Xavier Wankpa, again, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, from Iowa. Yes, Iowa again. Matter of fact, not only Wankpa, but you have Quentin Schulte for Iowa, you have, who's a 5th-year senior. So you have 2 more safeties at Iowa that we're going to want to zero in on this year. And unfortunately, Rod Moore, who could very well, I mean, you tell me, Dave, you think Rod Moore, depending on, because we don't know, maybe he'll play this year. We don't know. But does Rod Moore, is he a 2nd rounder or a 1st rounder talent without the injury?
Without the injury, he would be in the 1st round discussion. Not a shoo-in. I don't think any of these safeties are going to be shoo-ins 1st round in this upcoming draft. Caleb Downs is a shoo-in for the 1st round in 2026, but Moore has made a lot of plays on the football. He plays more physical. His body type, when I first saw him, I was thinking this is going to be another Kalen Bullock type prospect, but he has a little bit more physicality to him. He's got a little bit more poundage to him as well. But I think the torn ACL was in March, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago.
And
then again, I can't believe it's June already. So
right, and the ACL is not what it was even 10 years ago, like in terms of how long it could take to recover. But I would probably lean towards him not seeing the field this upcoming season, and that's going to bump him down a little bit. But without the injury in the equation, I still think this kid would be a top 45 pick. That's where I would put him, kind of peg him as a prospect for the 2025 draft. But I'm actually, sometimes you see something like this, I'm curious to see who steps up in his place, because this is going to open the door for a new prospect that we might not know about. And it's one of my favorite things to do in scouting is when an injury occurs or a big time prospect leaves the field, goes on to the NFL, and you haven't seen someone play yet. There might be someone there, a Roshan Johnson type, where he played behind Bijan Robinson or / with him, and then all of a sudden he ends up being an NFL draft pick. Like, those are the kind of situations that I love to see. Like, who's going to step up in Rod Moore's place?
Yeah, because we talked about on the SEC show, we talked about Sab, who transferred to Alabama, and who knows if he would be around after, because he was injured in late March and had surgery more did in mid to late April.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're looking. I mean, it's possible you could see him November, December playoff time. It's possible. Like, I wouldn't put it past him. We see your guys come back earlier from the ACL than we used to. So it's definitely a possibility. But you could also say, hey, he might just take this on the chin and come back and play for Michigan next year.
Maybe. Before we wrap up, any other safeties? I know we mentioned several, but any other safeties, Hayden? Any other players that we did not talk about that you wanted to throw in there?
Yeah, as we talked about before, I know you've mentioned it a couple times now, just the Iowa defense in general, just having the two safeties back there that they have. I think it is pronounced Scholl. I think you're right on that. And then Nwampka, I think is how you pronounce it, coming on.
We'll work on it.
Yeah, we'll work on that for sure, definitely. But just the talent that Iowa's defense has this year, you can expect them to run it back and once again be top of the Big Ten again this year.
Yeah, and with McNamara healthy, watch out. Lachey at tight end. So we'll see. I mean, their defense should be just as good, you would think. And if their offense is better, unfortunately, they don't have the cheap division deal that gave them access to the Big Ten championship game. It's not going to be that easy this time around. All right, so that's going to wrap it up. Next week, it's going to be the ACC, and we're going to, of course, start off with the offense on next week's show. So catch us then. Also, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share here on the channel if you enjoy these videos. And again, like I said, many more of these coming up, especially when we start previewing the college football season, just in general of the teams and so forth. We're going to have a lot of interviews with key writers, contributors, and so forth that follow specific teams. So can't wait to start scheduling all of those interviews. And our scouting reports, of course, are going to start to intensify once these guys have more time to check out film and then let you know what they think about them heading into the regular season in college football. And then here you go. Once again, the 2023 guide, the 24 guide is out soon in just a matter of days. So order this at ourlads.com now. All right, guys, appreciate it. I'll look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Thanks, Greg.